The world outside Elias Thorne's window wasn't painted in shades of gray, it was sculpted from bone and breath. Frostfern, the village huddled in the lee of the merciless Ironback Mountains, existed in a perpetual state of white siege. Snow, deep and relentless, blanketed the valley for 9 months of the year, piling against the log walls of the handful of cabins like a patient, suffocating tide. Only the defiant plume of smoke curling from Elias's chimney, and the fainter wisps from the 3 other dwellings scattered across the frozen basin, gave testament to the stubborn spark of life within. At 70, Elias's body was a map of this harsh land. His hands, knotted and scarred like ancient driftwood, told tales of axes biting into frozen timber, of hauling nets through ice-locked streams, of mending roofs under the lash of blizzards. His face, etched deep by wind and time, resembled the fissured granite outcrops that occasionally broke through the snow mantle. Pale blue eyes, the color of glacier ice, held a watchfulness honed over decades of reading the subtle, deadly language of the winter wilderness. He moved with the deliberate economy of a man who knew every calorie burned was precious, every step on the treacherous ground a calculated risk. This morning, like every morning for 50 years, he woke before dawn. The single room of his cabin held the deep cold, the fire in the small, efficient stove having dwindled to embers. He stirred the coals, added 2 split logs of dense mountain ash, hoarded like gold, and waited for the grateful crackle. The ritual was grounding. He boiled water in a blackened kettle, the sound of familiar comfort against the profound silence pressing in from outside. He measured a scant spoonful of precious coffee grounds into his chipped enamel mug. Luxury. Agnes, his wife, had loved coffee. She'd been gone 10 winters now, taken by the coughing sickness that stalked the isolated like a phantom. Her absence was a permanent chill in the cabin, deeper than any frost. As weak gray light began to seep through the thick ice crystals coating the small window, Elias geared up. Layers of homespun wool, patched and repatched, then his heavy, waxed canvas coat. Sturdy hide boots, lined with dried moss for insulation, laced tight. Rabbit fur mittens. The worn fox-fur hat Agnes had sewn for him, its ears perpetually drooping. Finally, the tools of survival, a bone-handled knife at his belt, a short, sturdy ice axe, and a coil of braided sinew rope slung over his shoulder. He picked up his long, ashwood staff, its end shod with iron, a third leg, a probe, a weapon. Stepping outside was like entering a different dimension. The air, sharp as shattered glass, stole his breath for a moment. Silence, thick and absolute, broken only by the faint crunch squeak of his boots sinking into the virgin snow. It was a foot deep already, and winter was far from its peak. Frostfern lay sleeping under its white shroud. He could just make out the shapes of the other cabins, Bjorn's sturdy dwelling 50 yards to the north, Marta and young Finn's smaller cabin nestled beside a skeletal copse of frost-bitten pines to the east, and Old Man Hemlock's place, barely visible now, further down the slope towards the frozen river. 4 households. 10 souls, including Finn, barely 12, and Hemlock, rumored to be even older than Elias and rarely seen outside. Elias's destination today was the trapline he'd set along the edge of the Whispering Woods, a stand of ancient, snow-laden pines that clawed at the mountain's flank. Meat was life. The meager stores of dried fish, smoked venison from a single, hard-won buck last autumn, and root vegetables buried deep in the frost-proof cellar wouldn't last the endless winter. The traps promised hare, maybe a fox, perhaps even a fisher if luck was breathtakingly kind. The walk was arduous. Each step was a lift, a plunge. His staff probed ahead, testing for hidden drifts or treacherous ice beneath the powder. The familiar landmarks, the lightning-struck pine, the bare rock, were softened, almost erased by the relentless snow. His breath plumed out, freezing instantly on his beard and eyebrows. The cold seeped in, past the layers, a persistent ache in his old joints. He thought of Agnes's warm laugh, the way she'd rubbed his hands between hers when he came in frozen. He pushed the memory away. Sentimentality wouldn't fill the larder. Reaching the first trap, his heart sank. Empty. Just disturbed snow where the snare had sprung prematurely, likely triggered by a falling branch burdened with snow. The second trap was the same. A flicker of unease, colder than the wind, touched him. At the third trap, nestled near the gnarled roots of a massive pine, he found tracks. Not rabbit. Wolf. Large, purposeful prints circling the area. The trap was mangled, the sinew cord snapped clean through. Teeth marks scored the wood. A low growl rumbled in Elias's own chest. Competition. Dangerous competition. He reset the trap with fresh cord, his fingers stiff and clumsy despite the mittens. He moved further along the line, his senses heightened, eyes scanning the monochrome landscape. The fourth trap held a scrawny snowshoe hare. Relief, thin but tangible. He dispatched it quickly, efficiently, whispering the old thanks his grandfather had taught him. Respect for the life taken. He tucked the small, stiff body into his pack. It was something. Not enough, but something. As he turned back towards Frostfern, a new plume of smoke caught his eye. Thicker, darker than the usual hearth smoke. It rose not from a chimney, but from near Bjorn's cabin. Elias's breath hitched. Fire. In this tinderbox world of dry wood and howling wind, fire was a terror almost equal to starvation. He broke into a shuffling run, ignoring the protest in his knees, the burn in his lungs. He found Bjorn, a bear of a man with a thick, frost-rimed beard, stamping frantically at the edge of a smoldering patch of ground beside his woodshed. Embers glowed angrily amidst the trampled snow. A pile of freshly split logs nearby bore scorch marks. Bjorn! Elias rasped, his voice raw. Bjorn looked up, his face flushed beneath the ice in his beard, eyes wide with residual panic. Elias! Damn near caught the shed. Spark from the forge chimney, wind caught it, landed right on the tarp covering the new splits. Elias joined him, scooping snow with his mittened hands, smothering the last stubborn embers. The acrid smell of burnt canvas and charred wood hung heavy in the frigid air. Lucky, Elias stated, his voice flat. Wind shifts, and Frostfern burns. Bjorn slumped, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cold. Lucky. He gestured towards the shed. Lost maybe a day's worth of splits. Not the end, but, damn close call. He looked towards the meager stack of seasoned firewood beside his cabin. Winter's barely started biting, Elias. The unspoken fear hung between them. Firewood was time, labor, life. Losing any was a wound. Elias clapped a hand on Bjorn's thick shoulder. Check your flu. Every day. Twice. He looked towards Marta's cabin. I'll check on Marta. See if she needs wood split. Bjorn nodded, the shared burden of their fragile existence settling back onto his broad shoulders. Marta, a woman whose face seemed permanently etched with worry lines deepened by the cold, greeted Elias with a tired smile. Young Finn, tall for his age but still coltish, was outside trying to split frozen logs, his swings awkward, inefficient. The pile beside him was pitifully small. "Elias," Marta said, her voice thin. "Good to see you." Her eyes darted to his pack. "Any luck?" "One hair," Elias replied, holding it up. "Wolves found the line first. Tore up a trap." Marta's face fell further. "Wolves?" Finn thought he heard howling last night. "Down near the river." Elias grunted. "Hungry." He walked over to Finn. "Here, lad. Let me show you." He took the axe from the boy's hands. "Frozen wood fights back. You need the right angle." He positioned a log on the chopping block, raised the axe with practiced ease, and brought it down in a clean arc. The frozen log split cleanly. "See? Use the cold. Let the weight do the work. Don't force it." He handed the axe back. Finn watched, then tried again. This time, the split was cleaner. A flicker of pride touched the boy's eyes. "Thank you, Elias," Marta murmured. "We're low on kindling too. The damp gets into everything." Elias spent the next hour helping Finn split more wood, demonstrating technique, sharing the silent rhythm of necessary labor. He left them half the hair. Marta protested weakly, but the gratitude in her eyes was profound. "Check your smoke hole, Marta," he reminded her as he left, the memory of Bjorn's near-disaster fresh. "Wind's getting tricksy." The next few days settled into a tense rhythm. Elias checked his traps daily, yielding little, another hare, a scrawny grouse. The wolf tracks became a constant, ominous presence. He saw them once, at dusk, 3 shadows flitting through the twilight trees on the ridge above the whispering woods, lean and silent. They watched him. He met their gaze, staff planted firmly, projecting a strength he didn't entirely feel. They melted back into the gloom. A standoff. For now. He visited Hemlock, the oldest resident. The man was frail, living in a cocoon of blankets near his stove, his mind sometimes clear as the mountain air, sometimes drifting like snowflakes. He had a good stack of wood, courtesy of Bjorn and Elias taking turns. His food stores were worryingly low. Elias shared some dried fish, feeling the pinch in his own reserves. Hemlock mumbled thanks, his eyes clouded, then sharpened. "The ice, on the river, it groans louder this year, Elias." "Like an old man's bones." Elias nodded. The deep-cut river was their lifeline when the snows finally relented, but its frozen surface was a treacherous highway now, vital for setting fishing holes further out where the trout might still lurk. Hemlock's ramblings often held kernels of truth born from a lifetime listening to the land. Then, the blizzard hit. It didn't arrive with fanfare, it simply became. The wind, a constant whisper, rose to a shriek. Snow, fine and hard as diamond dust, began to drive horizontally, erasing the world beyond Elias's window within minutes. The light died, replaced by a swirling, howling gray chaos. The temperature plummeted, making the logs in his stove crackle with desperate intensity even as drafts snaked icy fingers across the floorboards. This was the true test. Isolation became absolute. Visibility dropped to 0. The wind battered the cabin like a living thing trying to break in. Elias banked the fire carefully, conserving fuel. He lit a single tallow candle, its feeble light a tiny defiance against the roaring dark outside. He wrapped himself in blankets, hunkered near the stove, and listened. Listened to the wind's fury, listened for the ominous groan of snow load straining his roof beams, listened for any sound that didn't belong, the crash of a tree, the scream of rending wood that might signal a neighbor's disaster. He thought of Marta and Finn, hoping their roof held. He thought of Bjorn, hoping his firewood lasted. He thought of Hemlock, alone in his fading world. He thought of Agnes, the memory a small, internal warmth against the external maelstrom. He chewed on a strip of tough venison, forcing it down. Survival was a vigil. He dozed fitfully, the storm a constant, terrifying lullaby. The blizzard raged for 3 days and 3 nights. When it finally blew itself out, leaving an eerie, muffled silence, the world was transformed. Snowdrifts sculpted by the wind rose like frozen waves against the cabins, some reaching halfway up the walls. The sky was a hard, brittle blue, the sun glaring off the pristine white expanse with blinding intensity. Elias dug himself out, the labor backbreaking. The air was still, and so cold it felt solid. His first act was to scan the other cabins. Smoke rose from Bjorn's and Marta's chimneys, a profound relief. Hemlock's chimney showed only the faintest wisp. Elias's heart clenched. He began shoveling a path towards the old man's cabin, his muscles screaming in protest after days of forced inactivity. He found Hemlock alive, but barely. The fire in his stove was nearly out. The old man was curled under a mountain of blankets, shivering violently, his skin pale and waxy. The cabin was freezing. Elias moved with urgent efficiency. He rebuilt the fire, coaxing it to life with precious dry tinder in small splits. He melted snow for water, added it to a pot with the last of his dried fish and some precious crumbled herbs from his own store, making a thin broth. He lifted Hemlock's head, forcing small sips of the warm liquid between the old man's chattering teeth. "Elias," Hemlock murmured, his voice a dry rasp. "The ice," it groaned, like the world breaking. Hemlock," Elias said gently. "Just the storm. Rest now. Warmth is coming." He stayed for hours, feeding the fire, feeding Hemlock sips of broth, wrapping him tighter. Slowly, painfully, some color returned to the old man's face. The shivering subsided to tremors. He slept. Elias looked around the sparse cabin. Hemlock's woodpile, visible through the half-buried window, was critically low. Bjorn's delivery before the storm had been meager. Elias knew what he had to do. The next morning, the cold was a physical blow. The air crackled. Elias, Bjorn, and Finn, insisting he was strong enough, met by Marta's cabin. Their faces were grim. The storm had consumed vast amounts of fuel. Hemlock needed wood. They all needed wood. The usual foraging spots near the village were buried under impassable drifts. "The deep cut," Elias said, his voice cutting through the brittle air. "The old stand on the far bend. Wind-blown timber. Dry inside, if we can get to it." Bjorn frowned. "The river ice, Elias?"
Hemlock said. Hemlock hears many things, Elias replied, though unease flickered in his gut. But we need that wood.
We'll probe carefully. Ropes. It was a risk. A deadly risk. But the alternative, slow freezing, starvation, was certain. They trekked towards the frozen river, hauling a small sled with axes and ropes. The snow was chest-deep in places, requiring them to take turns breaking trail. Progress was agonizingly slow. The world was unervingly silent, the snow absorbing all sound. The river appeared, a wide, flat plain of snow-covered ice winding through the white valley. Elias took the lead, using his staff like a divining rod, probing ahead with every step, testing the ice's thickness through the snow covering.
Thunk. Thunk. Thunk solid.
They moved out, single file, Elias, then Bjorn, then Finn, then Marta keeping watch from the safer bank. The wind-blown pines stood like sentinels on the far bend, perhaps 300 yards away.
Halfway across, Elias's staff met resistance, then plunged through with a sickening crunch.
He jerked back just as a section of snow-covered ice, thin and rotten near a faster current hidden beneath, gave way.
Black, frigid water churned up. Finn gasped.
Bjorn cursed softly.
Pressure ridge.
Elias barked.
Wide berth. Follow my steps exactly.
He veered sharply left, probing even more frantically. His heart hammered against his ribs.
Hemlock's warning echoed in his mind. The groan of the ice.
He could hear it now, a deep, unsettling rumble transmitted through the frozen surface beneath their feet.
The river was alive, shifting under its icy carapace.
They reached the far bank without further incident, but the tension was thick enough to cut with an axe. The wind-blown timber was a godsend, dry, seasoned pine trunks snapped off cleanly by some past gale. They worked with furious, silent efficiency, axes biting into the frozen wood.
Every thwack seemed unnervingly loud in the vast silence.
Every groan from the river ice made them freeze, axes poised, listening. They loaded the sled until it was almost too heavy to pull. The journey back was even more nerve-wracking. The rotten ice patch seemed wider. The groans from the river felt deeper, more frequent.
Elias led, probing with manic intensity. Bjorn hauled the overloaded sled, muscles straining.
Finn pushed from behind, his young face set in a mask of fearful determination. They were 10 yards from the safety of the bank when the ice screamed. Not a groan, but a sharp, terrifying crack that echoed off the mountains like a gunshot. A dark fissure snaked across the snow-covered surface just behind Finn. The sled lurched. Bjorn bellowed, digging his heels in, hauling with every ounce of his immense strength. Elias dropped his staff and grabbed the sled rope beside Bjorn. Pull! Finn scrambled forward, stumbling onto the solid bank beside Marta, who reached out and yanked him the last few feet. Elias and Bjorn heaved, boots slipping on the ice, the rotten section groaning and buckling under the sled's weight. With a final, desperate surge, they dragged the sled onto the thick, safe ice near the bank just as the section behind them collapsed with a gurgling roar, revealing the churning black water beneath. They stood gasping, chests heaving, steam pouring from their mouths, staring at the gaping maw on the ice. The sled, piled high with life-giving wood, was safe. Finn was pale, shaking.
Marta clutched him. Bjorn leaned on the sled, breathing hard.
Elias retrieved his staff, his hands trembling slightly, not just from cold. They had danced with the river's hunger and won. This time, the shared labor forged a deeper bond. The wood was distributed, a larger share for Hemlock, whose cabin now held a steady, comforting warmth. They gathered in Elias's cabin that evening, the largest space. Marta contributed precious dried herbs. Bjorn brought a small pouch of coarse salt. Finn brought his quiet presence. Elias added the last of his dried venison and the 2 remaining hares. Together, they made stew. It simmered in a large pot over Elias's stove, filling the cabin with a savory aroma that felt like a physical embrace against the lingering cold outside. Conversation, usually sparse and practical, flowed more easily. Bjorn recounted the tale of the collapsing ice with gruff humor, making Finn grin despite the remembered fear. Marta spoke of a weaving pattern she remembered her mother using. Hemlock, propped up by blankets, ate slowly, his eyes clearer, watching them with a faint smile. As they ate the simple, life-affirming meal, the warmth was more than just physical. It was the warmth of shared struggle, of mutual dependence, of hard-won survival. Elias looked around the circle, the stoic strength of Bjorn, the quiet resilience of Marta, the burgeoning courage of Finn, the fragile endurance of Hemlock. He saw Frostfern. Not just a collection of cabins, but a community etched by ice, bound by necessity, and tempered by the relentless mountains. Later, after the others had left, promising to check the traplines together tomorrow, Elias stood at his window. The moon, full and impossibly bright, cast the snow-covered valley in an ethereal silver light. The mountains, vast and implacable, glowed under its gaze. The cold pressed against the glass, a constant presence. But inside, the embers of the fire glowed warmly in the stove. The lingering scent of stew and pine smoke hung in the air. He felt the deep fatigue in his bones, the ache of his 70 winters. He remembered the wolves, the blizzard, the groaning ice, the gnawing hunger that was never far away. He remembered Agnes. He didn't feel despair. He felt granite. Hard, enduring. He had weathered the storm. They had weathered it. He picked up his whetstone and began to sharpen his skinning knife. The rhythmic scrape was a familiar, comforting sound. Outside, the snow glistened like a million diamonds under the moon. The world was vast, cold, and indifferent. But here, in this small cabin, in this tiny cluster of defiance against the white wilderness, the spark endured. It was a fragile spark, fed by shared hardship and mutual aid, flickering against an immensity of cold. But it was. And for Elias Thorne, weathered by wind and time, that spark, that enduring defiance, was the only victory that truly mattered. Survival wasn't just about enduring the cold, it was about tending the fire within, and sharing its warmth. He looked towards Finn's cabin, a faint smile touching his lips. The boy had learned to split wood today. He would teach him the traplines tomorrow. The spark would be past. The snow might cover everything else, but it couldn't cover that. Elias turned from the window, the sharpened knife gleaming in the firelight, ready for whatever the next dawn brought.